episode of the Goodrum show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so before we start, just a big thank you to everybody that left comments, liked, retweeted, all that kind of stuff about last week's episode of the show on Springbank. It would have been nice if Springbank themselves had retweeted my tweet, but yeah, these things happen, and you'd be surprised at the amount of distilleries that don't actually retweet tweets and stuff like that. You know, free advertising, you're turning it down? Fine, okay, got no issue with that. But anyway, that's we're not worried about that. What we are worried about is I might have mentioned on a few passing occasions that I think the Swedes are all barking mad. And well, now I have conclusive proof that they are indeed completely barking mad. As you can see, today's episode of the show is on the Strane range of gins produced by Par Callenby at Schmogen. I've done episodes of the show on them in the past, but I don't think I've done an entire episode just purely devoted to the gins. I think from looking back at past episodes, I think I've kind of had a gin or two in with some of the Schmogen whiskey releases, but because of a certain new release from Par, I thought it was about time to do an entire episode of the show and torture my liver, shall we say. Yes, indeed. Anyway, so what's this new release I hear you say? Well, as you may remember, Par released, or has released in the past, this bottling here called the Strane Uncut, which is essentially as it comes off the still at 76%. And for a number of years, it was indeed the world's strongest gin. Whether Par kind of set out to produce the world's strongest gin or not, I honestly couldn't say, but by default it certainly was. Until February of this year, when a Scottish distiller called Twin River Distillery decided to up the ante, albeit by only 1%, but 1% is 1%, and released a gin at 77%. And well, that didn't stay world's strongest gin for very long. In actual fact, it was only a matter of months. Now, Par, in his email to me, mentioned about I think a Danish gin that's been distilled to 80%. I couldn't find any information about that, but certainly there is a South African gin called a distillery in Cape Town called the Drought Edition Gin, bottled at 80%. I mean, just think about that for a minute. 80%. Bloody hell. I mean, their raison d'etre, for want of a better word, was to basically conserve water by basically making this high alcohol gin. Yeah, okay, right, fine, I can kind of live with that. And well, you would have thought that would be the end of that. So, it's a South African gin that's now world's strongest gin. Well, not for Par, it isn't. It was basically a challenge, and obviously he had to better that, and well, he bloody well has done. And as you may know, Par is a bit particular about his gin, and doesn't just make a gin. No, he makes 3 gins which he then blends together. So he does the juniper and coriander seed in one batch, then he does the citrus in another batch, and the herbal botanicals in another. And so he uses 12 botanicals, which are juniper, coriander seed, sage, lime and lemon rind, basil, garden mint, sweet almond, cinnamon bark, and licorice root, along with 2 secret botanicals. I just love the whole secret botanicals business, of which I imagine one has to be either orris root or angelica, because they're fixative. So don't know what's particularly secretive about them, but there you go. Anyway, so basically, if you go back and have a look at the picture, for want of a better word, the starting picture, I suppose, you'll probably just about make out the rather sort of dinky gin still in the front of the picture, and it is, well, it's not exactly what you call a looker, is it? I mean, it's certainly not a lovely gleaming Holstein still with brass and stainless steel and all that kind of stuff. It's a rather dumpy looking miniature kind of whiskey still, really. Kind of, what's the word that you would use? Well, certainly not pretty is not the word that would come to mind. Sort of, it kind of does its job, I suppose. So anyway, basically what he does is he takes a base spirit of 96.2%. So for all you gin Nazis out there, oh, this is not craft gin. He doesn't make his own base spirit. Ooh. Anyway, so we're not going to go on that. I mentioned that last time, I think, when I did gin. So he takes his base spirit, which has been produced from grain and malted barley at 96.2, and puts it into the little still. Mixes it with 40 litres of alcohol to 50 litres of water, which gives a charge of around about 42%. And then obviously it's a one-shot distillation. Taking the cuts, it ends up with effectively the Strane Uncut, which is around 76%. I mean, I think the first batch was 75 point something, but certainly this particular batch that I've got here today is 76%. And so there you go. He's got his Uncut, and then he basically adds a little bit of water to each, and so cuts it down to 57.1 and bottles it as the navy strength, and then cuts it down a little bit further to 47.4 and bottles it as the merchant strength. So how in God's name does he manage to get 80% finished product? Well, apparently same way of production. Instead of using, so obviously there's the three different types of gin, A, B and C as he calls them, but in this instance, to create the Strane Uncut Ultra, or I think it should have been called Strane Extreme personally, because I think it's pretty bloody extreme. First off, he cuts down the number of botanicals to 6, so he's just basically using the juniper, coriander, almond, lime zest, licorice root and fresh basil. Where's the fixative in that one? But maybe it's because the alcohol is so high it doesn't actually need a fixative. I don't know, just a guess, I imagine. So this time around he uses 60 litres of the neutral grain spirit with 30 litres of water, which gives him a starting point of 64%. He then goes on to basically say that obviously being really careful, very slow distillation, and taking a narrower cut point, he can get away with 80-odd%, or in this case 82.5. And the interesting thing he says is that basically he has to have his fire extinguisher close to hand, because the still A is heated by a naked flame and apparently leaks a little bit. So I mean, you know, chances are it could completely go up in flames. Another reason why I think it's completely barking mad. So if you actually sort of hear the smoke in distillery going up in flames, you'll know the reason why, that he's trying to outdo, because somebody is going to try and outdo 82.5. I mean, you know, it'll get to the point where somebody will basically just take the starting neutral grain spirit and make a bathtub gin, just dump all the botanicals into it and then just bottle it and go, there you go, 96% ABV gin, you know, probably nigh bloody undrinkable, but there ain't going to be anybody that's going to beat that one. And but anyway, so there you have it. That's the reasoning behind today's episode of the show. I thought it might be fun to look at the whole range in one go, and obviously I have the water barrel ready, because I'm bloody well going to need it. That's all I can say. So let's well, I told you pretty much what's today's lineup. Let's have a proper look at today's lineup. Okay, so like I said, we're going to kick off with the merchant strength, which is cut down to 47.4. Then the second one we're going to be looking at, of course, is the navy strength, which is cut to 57.1. Third one we're going to be looking at is the uncut, which is 76%. Then we're going to look at the ultra, which, like I said, is 82.5. I mean, you could probably drown that in tonic water and you'd still taste the juniper, I imagine. And one I haven't actually mentioned at all so far, which I really like and stopped since Pa created it, is the oak aged, which spends, I think, about 12 months-ish, I think, in ex-Smogan sherry casks. So I think, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think, because I'll get there eventually after I've kind of got past the extreme point, shall we say. But anyway, so there you go. That's today's lineup. Let's start at the beginning then, shall we? Right, okay, so this is the merchant strength. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Intense, pungent, loads of juniper, lime, lemon, lovely freshness, really well balanced, I think. There's a little bit of oiliness in the background coming from the spirit. Touch of licorice and the coriander. It's all really quite harmonious. I mean it's just only 47%, and it doesn't come across overly alcoholic. Certainly, it's all quite harmonious, all quite well blended together, and just, yeah, there's a little bit of sort of bitter almond kind of coming through. Not necessarily sweet almond, I find. It's more slightly more bittery, sort of maybe kind of almond shell sort of character. But I mean, it's certainly got lots of character, it's certainly got lots of personality, and that's one of the things I love about this gin. It is, even at its modest level, it's certainly no shrinking violet. Touch of earth as well. Let's see what the pal's like. Chewy, oilier, again kicks off with the juniper. The citrus element really comes through on the finish and really sort of freshens it up, and sort of obviously the alcohol is kind of giving it that kind of tongue tingling kind of character, or feeling, I should say. It's also a little bit sweeter as well. The almond is a little bit sweeter than it comes across in the nose. Not quite so bitter. Again, some lovely coriander notes, little herbal note, just a sort of touch of, it's almost kind of minty, sort of minty kind of basil sort of kind of character. And again, I think the balance is absolutely spot on, really very good. So don't think there's any real necessity to put water with that one, but so we're going to just move on to the navy strength. Right, okay, so let's move on to the navy strength. So you kind of pretty much expect the nose to be pretty much the same as the merchant strength, but maybe with a bit more alcohol, but we shall see. More juniper in actual fact. It sort of has less oils, which I would have thought would have been the other way around. It's got possibly more higher alcohol, so it feels more fresher. Certainly I'm getting more of the lime and the lemon, and it just feels crisper and fresher and less oily, and still quite earthy. Yeah, definitely getting a mintiness on this now. It's again really quite complex, and again, you know, loads and loads of character. So let's see what the past like. Oilier, a lot more noticeable alcohol, certainly on the finish, so it's got more of a drier sensation. More coriander. The citrus is a little sweeter as well, although the almond is a little bit more bitter. Again, plenty of juniper. Real kind of dusty spice aftertaste. I mean, I don't know whether, difficult to say whether these come from the same batch, or whether sort of, I don't quite know exactly whether sort of Parr kind of like we'll do a run for, say, the merchant strength or the uncut or what have you, or whether he just sort of like does it once it runs it all off and then maybe bottles some at some strength. I don't honestly know. I don't know the exact way of production. So you're going to get batch variations at the end of the day. Like I said, this has got a little bit more freshness, so we're going to put a little drop of water with it. I mean, this is highly scientific, it's a drop, so I'm hoping it's going to be sort of around, drop it down to around about sort of maybe a similar kind of ABV to the merchant strength, but not having a hydrometer, it's a bit random, so just have to live with me on this one. Probably less actually now. Certainly it's brought out the oils, it's heavier, it's more spirit orientated, a lot more herbal. It's almost got a kind of sort of manure-y kind of herbalness. I mean, I know that probably doesn't sound too pleasant in your gin, but it's very natural. Definitely getting more basil now, sort of almost kind of crushed basil leaf. Fresh crushed basil leaf as opposed to dried basil leaf. Less of the almond and the coriander. Juniper's backed off a little bit as well, but still, that's nice. Let's see what the palate's like now. Pretty much along the lines of the merchant strength. A little bit sweeter, bitter almond, a little bit more licorice, less herbal, still quite junipery. Yeah, I mean, again, wouldn't expect it to be sort of weirdly different. I mean, if it was, then you'd wonder what was going on, but certainly it's kind of like, you know, how much tonic water do you want to put with your gin? Do you want to go with the merchant strength? Do you want to go with the navy strength? I mean, right, deep breaths. On to the uncut. So this is essentially as it comes off the still. No cutting or anything. This is pretty much the raw material, I suppose. Anyway, let's see what the nose goes. Pungent, more kind of spirit character, which is what you would expect with the higher ABV. It's certainly got a slight, it's got a slightly rawer kind of feel to it, which is obviously what the alcohol is doing for it. Still quite junipery, although the alcohol is very, not masking, that's kind of the wrong word, it's suppressing, I guess, is probably a better word. It's really quite earthy. I'm getting some cereal notes as well now. almost kind of tea leafy sort of notes as well. That I'm guessing that's possibly sort of a kind of combination of sort of basil and cassia bark, or cinnamon bark as the case may be, sorry. It's intense, really intense, but certainly it seems to have kind of pushed the sort of the juniper character sort of down in into the spirit, and certainly sort of brought out more of the spices. Maybe that's possibly due to sort of a slightly different blend, maybe, you know, because, you know, blending the 3 different base gins together is going to sometimes, even if you do 50% of that, 25% of that, 25% of that, you're still going to get a sort of a slight variation, because at the end of the day we're all human. Let's see what the pal's on. More cereal, more alcohol, less juniper. Again, a lot more spices. I'm getting a lot more of the bark, the cinnamon, the coriander seed, bitter almond on the finish. Again, tongue tingling, mouth watering, really intense. A very herbal aftertaste as well. That sort of mint and basil note really come through strongly on the finish. So it seems to me that by basically sort of emphasising the alcohol in the bottling seems to sort of like bring up the spices and the herbal element, and just suppress the juniper, which is quite interesting. So let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Well, again, we're kind of back in the sort of, you know, kind of merchant strengthy kind of character. A little bit sweeter, a little bit more of the almond. Still really nice. Again, a little bit more juniper now, a little bit more sweeter juniper, less earthy possibly. And although, like I said, it's very much feels like the Navy strength, there is a subtle difference as well. Let's see what pal's like now. Very oily, very citric, lots of lemon, lime, more juniper, almost chewy on the finish, it has to be said. A little bit of cereal note, softer spices, still really mouth-filling and really intense, and really good. Right, deep breaths time for a bit of extreme, or sorry, ultra, as the case may be. So half the botanicals and a damn sight more alcohol. Let's see where we go with this one, shall we? Quite smoky in actual fact, or the juniper is quite smoky, not as sweet as in some of the other bottlings. Really intense. I mean, you can smell the alcohol. I mean, it really has kind of brought out that kind of raw, manure-y kind of intensity of character. There was definitely still juniper there. I mean, even though he's probably, I mean, I don't know whether it just says, you know, an extra dose of juniper, excuse me, it's still quite down in the mix, if you see what I mean. A little bit of citrus, but really the alcohol is kind of like, whoa, yeah, it is not totally masking the nose, but it's certainly kind of suppressing a lot of the nose. But see what the palate's like. Oof! Wow! Bloody hell! Juniper, huge amounts of juniper. I mean, I expected the juniper to be quite compressed, but juniper and spices are sort of like, oh wow, that is intense. It's weird. I was thinking the other day when I actually tasted these samples, I was thinking. You might remember the Bruichladdich X4 and all the hoo-ha about that, and the fact that a teaspoon of that could turn you blind and all that kind of stuff. And then you realise that the X4 was actually only 50%, and they were making all this hoo-ha and fuss about something that was 50%. This is 80 odd, for God's sake. I mean, no, I've not gone blind, although maybe if I drank too much of it without any water in it I might do, but wonderful purity, has to be said. There's no kind of yes, there's spirit character, it's got that slight cereally kind of note, but it's just a huge hit of juniper and a huge hit of spice. I mean, it's kind of you could argue that it kind of lacks the sort of the complexity and the nuance of the sort of merchant strength and the Navy strength, but I'm guessing that the higher alcohol is probably just you could use the other botanicals, but they'd probably just be completely obliterated by the alcohol, and so obviously Parr has probably decided to sort of pare down the botanicals to sort of like, you know, use the ones that will basically sort of work well with the higher level of alcohol. Right, so let's put a reasonable amount of water with it, shall we say, and see what that does to it. Let's see what the nose is like now. Still intensely junipery, but that juniper it's got a lovely kind of sweetness. It's also got a bit of an earthiness to it. There's again a slight manuriness, a slight natural character. Really brought forward the spice as well, the coriander. I mean, that is intense. That is huge. I mean, that's big. You know, I mean, you might think something like Death's Door is a big, overblown American gin. I ain't got nothing on this one, I can tell you that. And you really can smell all. It's like if you take some fresh lime rind and just smell the lime rind, you can smell it in this. I mean, it is just incredible. It is kind of like, it's beyond 11, you know, it's like, whoa, this is way, way beyond that. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like, shall we? Again, really junipery. I think this kind of works like Octomore. I mean, Octomore works because it's not just a peat monster. You have the shades of peat, shall we say. So you have kind of like, you have the sort of oily peat, you have the earthy peat, you have the slight medicinal peat, and you have all these kind of complex characters from the peat. With this, you have all the complexity within the juniper, so you get the sweet juniper, the slightly sort of earthy juniper, the slightly manury juniper. It's kind of a study in juniper, really, at the end of the day. Like Octomore is a study in peat, it has to be said. And I think there's sort of like, you can draw comparisons certainly between the two of them. But there's still plenty of citrus there. It's still got, you know, a good balance considering how strongly alcoholic it is. And yeah, I mean, it's yes, he's obviously done it because somebody else has come along and done something stronger. I mean, it's like the old joke, isn't it? It's a case of, you know, two guys in the pub. One says to the other, why did you go and climb Mount Everest? And the other guy says, well, because it was there. And he said, well, and why did you swim down the Amazon? And he said, well, because it was there, you know. And so the guy says, well, there's an elephant over there. You're going to climb up its arsehole because it's there. Not that I'm saying, you kind of get what I'm trying to say. It's sort of like, you know, I'm doing it because I can kind of thing. But, you know, it could have been an exercise in, not futility, but it just could have been, how strong can I get my gin, even though it's bloody undrinkable. But it isn't, you know, he's created something that, yes, is very, very strongly alcoholic, but is eminently drinkable, and just about drinkable without adding anything to it. But I wouldn't suggest you do it too much, shall we say. But anyway, there you go, that's the old one. Right, and finally, we're now going to sort of be a bit more sedate and come down to 55%. This is the Oak Age Strane. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That is lovely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Oak Age gins, and I think that, I've probably said it before, this is why I think the... Right, okay, so let's move on to the Oak Aged gin. Let's see what nose is on this end. That's lovely, that is really nice, and I still think that this is where the gin market is going to go. I think, like I said before, the amount of Oak Aged gins that are now available on the market is considerably more than it was a few years ago. And it has that classic Oak Aged gin, slightly mentholated kind of note on the nose, juniper, it's almost kind of slightly sort of elderflowery kind of character. Again, citric, a little bit of manure, a little bit of peat, touch of sherried fruit as well, but again, all quite nicely balanced. It's not too OTT on the oak. In actual fact, I'm getting quite a lot of peat now, in actual fact. But it's got the juniper has a lovely sweetness to it. There's almost also a slightly sort of violet-y kind of note as well, and I think it works really, really well with the oak. And there's a little bit of spice as well. That is really quite complex and really quite entertaining. And certainly, I mean, I'm buggered if I know how it would work with tonic water, but certainly on its own, it's got a lovely nose. Let's see what the part's like. Lovely sweetness, vanilla, dried fruit, bit of peat, bit of sweet juniper, a little bit of spice as well, coriander, a little bit of licorice as well. Again, slightly mentholated, like a lot of those kind of Oak Aged gins can be, but really complex. A lot going on there. Again, like I said, I don't think I'm entirely sure exactly how that would work with tonic water, but then, like I keep saying, you know, it's not my thing. You know, I just want to taste the spirit as is, as nature intended, and certainly I really, really like that. I think that's really impressive. So right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. So firstly, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to both Pa and to Robert Highfern for samples for today's episode of the show. Hope I haven't let you guys down. I hope this has been an interesting review, and I hope that sort of Pa is going to go, bloody hell, did he really take a big mouthful of the Uncut Ultra, like he did with the Uncut. It's like, Anyway, no, honestly, really big thank you to the guys for the samples. I mean, obviously, if it wasn't for the support that I get from distilleries and distributors and what have you, then obviously there wouldn't be a show. And I hope you enjoyed watching it. I hope it's entertaining. You know, I might be a bit flippant at times, I suppose, but then, yeah. Anyway, so let's sum today's tasting up. The Merchant Strength. Yeah, it's a good gin. It's really impressive, and yeah, I kind of like that. It's really nicely balanced. The Merchant Strength, probably just that little bit more intensity. It's started to sort of, you know, become a little bit manure-y maybe on the nose, but it has that sort of lovely natural character. It's not round, well, rounded, wrong word, polished is the word I was probably looking for. It's not polished and commercial. It's not kind of like mass produced and sort of like a little bit, you know, and there's no weird botanicals in there. It's not trying to be something it isn't. It is a really interestingly well crafted gin. The Uncut, well, yeah, impressive again, sort of ramps up the sort of like the natural character, and you know, you can onto the Ultra. I mean, the Ultra obviously is coming only in these 20 cl bottles, which are not that expensive actually. Well, I mean, yeah, it's 40 odd quid. I mean, yes, all right, it's expensive for a gin, but you know, Par could have bottled that in a 50 cl and charged, you know, 80 or 90 pounds, I suppose. But he's only going to do it in 20 cls, and you know, so it gives you an opportunity to give us a try. You know, it's yes, all right, you don't need a huge amount of it, and you'll probably put more tonic water in it with anything else. But you know, it's certainly worth trying. Neat, shall we say? And the Strane Oak Aged, yeah, I really like that. I love the whole range. I like oak aged gins, as you know, and you know, the purists may well argue that it ain't proper gin, governor. But like I said, I like the sort of, when it's done really well, when you get the balance between the gin character and the oak character combining, it's just something slightly different. It's and why not? You know, when they tend to be one way or t'other, you sort of like think, well, what the hell was the point of that? You know, but as we know, sort of, you know, essentially finishing spirits in oak is not an exact science, but you know, obviously once you've done it for sort of long enough, you kind of get an idea of where you're going with it, and Par's doing, I think, a really good job. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm gonna off now and lay down for a little bit, I think. Actually, no, I'm gonna finish these off and then I'll probably fall over and lay down. Anyway, not quite sure. Oh, I know what I'm doing next week. Oh yes, it's going to be really interesting. Well, all of my episodes of the show are really interesting, but next week's going to be a really interesting episode of the show. So until we get there, good afternoon and good ramming.